Welcome to Rethinking Youth Ministry, where each week we hope to raise the bar for youth ministry by asking questions, interviewing thinkers, and having real, honest conversations about what it looks like to lead the next generation. I'm Sarah, and today I'm thrilled to be joined by Ashley Bohinc.
Hey!
Crystal Chiang.
Hello, friends!
And our guest today, Dan Scott.
Hey!
And Dan has been with us before, but just a reminder for those of you who have not met Dan before. He is the curriculum director for 252 Kids and Preteen here at Orange. And earlier this year, Dan wrote a book specifically about preteens called Caught in Between. And we're here today to talk to Dan about his book, what he's learned in studying this age, and to connect the dots about why this stage matters for those of us in youth ministry.
Awesome.
Dan, the book is so good.
It's so good.
Oh, thank you,
Awesome.
guys.
Super awesome.
Also, the author photo on the back.
Is Dan in middle school?
It's middle school.
Yes, this is my
Perfect.
5th grade.
Preteen Dan.
Yes, this is my 5th grade class picture. And I'm wearing a tie because I went to a Christian school and it was chapel day. And they always made sure that those two were together. So all the boys would be wearing ties.
So you had to wear ties on chapel day?
Yeah, just chapel day though. Every other day was just a, collared shirt.
Got it.
Have you had many comments on the photo?
Yeah, I have. Yeah.
That's so brave. I don't think I would put my
Zero
5th grade
chance
picture.
Nobody would buy the book if I put mine.
Well, it was
Nobody
like a
needs
total
to see that
accident. It was a total accident. It was like, hey, we need a headshot. I'm like, oh, I don't have one, but I've been posting these on my social media.
Yeah.
And the publishing team was like, do it.
It's a great idea. It was
So
perfect.
funny.
It was awesome. So we've all read parts, if not all, of this book before. And we just wanted to hear a little bit from you about what caused you to be interested in this topic. What are some of the things you've learned about it and what we can learn as youth leaders based off of what you discovered in writing this book?
Yeah, that's a big question.
Yes.
It's a massive question. But to answer the first part, why it's, been on my heart and why I just felt like we should write down some ideas. I've had a lot of experience working with preteens over the years. I was a 6th grade English and Bible teacher. That's actually what got me into church ministry.
Okay.
I had to write curriculum for my 6th grade Bible class the year that I was a teacher before I retired, as you do, after a year of teaching 6th graders. And
Hey now.
I know. I loved them and I wanted to work with them more and I wanted to work with them in the context of the church after writing curriculum for them. And so that's why I went to seminary and, I ended up going into children's ministry, but the preteen side of what we did was always really exciting to me. These 5th graders, 4th graders, 6th graders, they're just at such a unique phase of life.
Yeah.
And then in my own family, my wife Jenna and I have 4 kids and 3 of them are through the preteen years and one of them is like smack dab in the middle of it. So I'd been learning things at home and research that we did for the Phase Project and just what we've done for curriculum here. I just felt like it was time to put down some of that research into a book because a lot of people have been asking us about the phase.
What would you say the ages are? I know that there's some kind of
there's a discrepancy for sure. Some would go as young as 8 years old, especially in girls because of early onset puberty.
Okay.
But, I kind of keep it in that like 10 to 12-year-old range.
Okay.
Some boys, though, they're going to act way more like preteens into 7th grade, 13 years old, because really preteen is not necessarily physical.
Okay.
It's a lot of what's happening mentally with how they're thinking about life, from concrete thinking to abstract thinking, how they deal with relationships and friendships. All of those play into it as much as I've been through puberty or I haven't been through puberty.
So you would say it starts a little bit later for boys as well. So girls could start as early as 9.
Yeah.
And
yes. And boys are later, around 11.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
So right now it feels like, is it normally falling under a children's ministry environment? Like what's the kind of the problem with the preteen
in the
ministry
church
now?
world? Like if you're looking at next gen ministries across the board, a lot of churches default to what their school systems do.
Okay.
So if their school system, goes through 5th grade or goes through 6th grade, those kids are just automatically going to be put into the children's ministry. In some districts, we break those rules because 6th graders feel like we should move them up into middle school and be with an 8th grader. So that I think has been the default, that we're going to put preteens with the kids ministry because a lot of them are still kids. I mean, a 10-year-old's a 4th grader and that's a kid. But we are finding a lot of middle school pastors are starting to speak into it because the children's pastors are like, my fifth graders are checking out.
Yeah.
I don't know what to
That's
do
a
with
big
them.
problem.
And they are checking
Yeah.
out. But the answer is not necessarily to put them into a room with eighth graders because
Right.
a fifth grader and an eighth grader are so developmentally different.
Right.
And what they need out of a message series
Right.
from the application standpoint, which you guys could absolutely speak to, are very different as well.
Right. Right.
One of the things I loved about your book is it didn't feel like a kids pastor book and it didn't feel like a middle school pastor book. It felt like a family ministry book.
Oh, great.
That you almost
Yeah.
have to have a comprehensive family ministry to
Yeah.
get this right. Because I think as I sit around and listen to preteen conversations, as a high school person, I'm like, do I care though?
Should I care?
Should I care? Am I supposed to care?
But I think
Yeah.
you should. Because I think what we're finding is that what's happening in fifth grade doesn't get played out until high school. So in fifth grade, that's when they initially start to check out. That's when they initially have those big questions about their faith. Like, wait a second, we talked about this on the Think Orange podcast, where there's this moment for a kid when they start to realize that Noah's Ark isn't the happy pictures that they
Right.
see in a church nursery, but is a bunch of floating bodies, and that starts to mess with their minds. And so that's when they start to question. And children's ministries aren't necessarily the safest place to ask hard
Right.
questions about faith.
Right.
They should be. Unfortunately, the stereotype is that they're not. And so that's when they start to question. And by the time they get to high school, if they haven't been able to wrestle with any of those questions, they get a driver's license and then they leave.
Right.
There's no one that has bridged any of the transitions
Yeah.
between elementary and middle and high school. And so, we really need to look at all the transitions.
Yeah, well,
the
that was-
preteen ministry is just like the first big one
Right.
that happened.
That was one of the things I remember reading in your book, that churches lose kids at every transition. And that
Absolutely.
we typically think of transitions from the elementary to middle school or middle school to high school, but you're saying this is a transition happening within the elementary.
And it happens
context,
within,
essentially.
because what is happening in the brain is so significant. This movement from everything is black and white to, whoa, nothing is black and white. What does that mean? Does that mean everything
Right.
that I've learned up until this point is wrong?
Yeah.
Or, not true? And there's just not a space for them to ask those questions because most of them are still in this environment with a kindergartner.
Yeah.
Right.
And now they're like, well, it must just mean that church isn't for me.
Right.
Right.
One of my favorite parts of the book, Dan, was when you talked about if we can engage a preteen and the parent of a preteen while they're a
Yeah.
preteen, the more success we'll have in keeping them engaged when they're middle and high school.
Yeah.
Because in the preteen phase, they
Yeah.
still really care.
Right.
I mean, not that they
No, but they do. No, that's true.
it's not that they don't care.
No, but parents care in a very different way about their fifth grader
Yes.
than they do even about their sixth grader.
Yeah.
How
Because-
so? Explain that.
Well, at least around here,
Yeah.
and in a lot of schools that I've been a part of, fifth grade is the last year of elementary school.
Right.
And especially in the church. It's very often the last year before they go into middle school.
Right.
So parents have this urgency where they're hypersensitive to, oh my word, my kid's growing up. Am I giving them what I need to give them? Am I,
Yeah.
creating the right space for them?
And they're going to middle school and it has such a bad
And it
reputation.
has such a bad reputation that they're like,
Right.
oh no. So they pay a lot of attention in fifth
Yeah.
grade.
Yep.
Yeah.
And when I talk to preteen pastors, specifically, preteen pastors, this is their primary responsibility. They're saying they have so much engagement from moms and dads because in their minds, their child is still a child.
It's like their last chance.
And it's their last chance. And they want to do everything they can to set up that fifth grader well
Yeah.
for the future.
Yeah.
Elementary pastors would say the same thing, but they're not necessarily resourced to answer the questions in the way the fifth grade parent needs them because they're also thinking about the parent of the kindergartner
Right.
who's also going through a massive transition
Yes.
on that end.
Right. Yeah.
And so they have to pick and choose where their energies go. And, if we can create somehow this environment where we have fifth and sixth graders or fourth through sixth graders with this experience where there's someone in charge of what mom and dad are experiencing, and what
Yeah.
kids are experiencing. We are going to set them up because we can be more specific with them. And the more specific your audience, the clearer your applications,
Right.
the better you can prepare them in that stage of life.
So we talk a lot on this podcast about like the difference between middle and high school.
Yeah.
For anyone that's listening who's like, well, I'm trying to make more of an effort for middle school, like what would you say is the biggest difference between like a preteen ministry and a middle school ministry?
That's a great question.
That's a great question. And it's probably in how you talk about the different topics. Because it's not that they don't need the topics.
Right.
The statistics show that 11-year-olds stumble upon porn as much, as
Right.
8th graders, might stumble upon it. 11 is a massive year for that. So we do have to talk about it. But they are, for the most part, still kids.
Right.
Just hitting puberty for the first time. They're not on the other side of that. So the 8th grader needs something way different than the 5th grader needs. They still both need the conversation on some level, but one is more foundational and one is like, hey, you might have already messed up. So one is catching them on the front end and one is helping reconcile the issues on the back end.
So it sounds like what you're saying is that preteen ministry might be the last preventative ministry. Is that right, Dan?
Yeah,
Okay.
in so many words, sure.
Okay. Because we actually say like a similar thing about middle school ministry when we talk about the difference
Right,
between middle
sure.
and high school. So
Yeah.
in my mind, I'm still trying to figure out like what is the difference? Like if I'm a student pastor and I'm in charge of, or I'm a next gen pastor, I'm in charge of everything. Like,
Yeah.
is it enough to just do it in middle school?
I'm thinking the foundational preventative is happening at 4th and 5th
You
grade.
start earlier.
It's starting earlier because it's introducing the fact that there's a world out there that is hard to deal with and live through and make choices in. And you're not necessarily with the 4th or 5th grader going into as much detail about that, but you are laying a foundation when their minds are starting to go from this concrete to abstract.
Right.
You're maybe not going abstract, but you're at least acknowledging the world is gray.
Yeah.
And there are going to be choices that you have to make, and it's going to be difficult. And some of these choices are coming at you. Like you're looking at an ad on your phone because you just want to play this game, and all of a sudden you're hit with this, this image that you don't know what to do with.
Right.
There's no one having that conversation.
Yeah.
So would it be fair to say that maybe preteen is they start to identify that the world isn't black and white, it's gray,
Yeah.
and that there is like brokenness in the world.
Yeah.
And middle school might be where they start to move towards, oh, there's brokenness in me.
Yeah.
Like there's
Yeah,
something
that's
not
good.
Yeah.
beautiful about me.
Yeah.
And then it proceeds to high school. Would that be fair to say?
I think that would be
And to
great
your
to
point
say.
about losing kids in the transitions, that if that's not acknowledged in the upper elementary, preteen, and they're never going to get to they will have fallen
Absolutely.
away from the ministry by the time they get to middle
Absolutely.
school.
Well,
to
and
answer
it's such
those
a big deal
questions.
that you make preteen ministry a safe place to talk about
Right.
the brokenness in the world and the place that things don't add up. Because even as you're talking about the hard questions that they ask, I'm thinking, wow, I haven't seen a lot of 9th graders ask that. I haven't seen a lot of 10th graders ask that, but all of a sudden it pops up in 11th grade. And I think, honestly, a lot of students have had those questions since 4th and 5th grade, but they learned it wasn't okay to ask them.
Yeah.
And in 11th grade, they get car keys and they're deciding, do I stay or do I go? And suddenly those questions become a big deal.
Yeah.
Right. And they've snowballed into something that they don't even know how to begin
For
to
sure.
process.
Well, see, most children's ministry environments are not built around questions. They're built around statements. Here's
That's
this.
really
Say that
good.
again.
Yeah.
Say that
Yeah.
again.
Most children's ministries are not built around questions. They are built around statements. So here is a true statement that you should learn because it is foundational to your faith growing up.
Yeah.
What we try to do through 252 preteen,
Okay.
what I would hope churches do across the board when their kids get into preteen ministry is that they start from a place of questions. That they introduce that questions are okay to ask. Because I think you're right. I think the kids do have the questions earlier, but they're in a statement environment where
Right.
they're like, oh, well, if it doesn't go with this statement, this bottom line that I should learn,
Right.
I don't know what to do with that. Like they haven't been given small group leaders don't know how to handle hard questions necessarily, and they just don't create that safe place.
And they
So I would
applaud the kids who make statements. Which
Yes.
I've noticed the tendency is to applaud the kids who make statements. And
It's the Bible quiz team. It's
Right.
the rote memory sticker on the chart. Like, we're going to give you a prize from the treasure box. Like, and that is okay on some level, because we do want kids to
concrete
have a
understanding.
concrete
Right.
understanding of their faith and what that means. But at some point, we're going to kick against the foundation.
Yeah.
And is the environment safe enough for me to do that?
Right.
And that is what I'm hoping this book
Yeah.
can do for churches across the world.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that's lofty, but
Yeah.
I want them to be able to create a safe environment where if I'm going to kick against a foundation, it's not crumbling.
Yeah.
Dan, I think that's so brilliant and helpful for listeners. I really do. And I think I'm so grateful that you're blazing this trail, because there aren't a ton of people talking about preteen to youth pastors. And I think one of the convictions I felt even in reading your book was, did I do a great job partnering with my preteen or our children's pastor in my church,
Yeah.
could I have done better? And I'm like, as a 3 on the Enneagram, I'm making a list of all the ways I should have done better, because I'm like, oh my gosh, I didn't even think about all this. But something I really loved about it was it really showed me and reminded me that the bridge into middle school ministry is just as important as the bridge out of middle school ministry.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times people talk about the transition from middle to high school. And even though parents are feeling the tension between elementary and middle.
The church just takes it for granted.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, they want to move up, so they're just going to move up.
Exactly.
But I don't know if they've been mentally prepared to move up. Like, they might be feeling the anticipation that, like, I'm done with children's ministry. I can't wait to get to middle school ministry. A kid is definitely feeling that.
Right.
But they don't know what that's going to mean for how they're going to process content. What is that environment
Right.
going to look like? How is it different? And so all of us, and because many middle school ministries start during the summer, they haven't even hit a middle school classroom yet.
Right.
So they haven't,
interesting too,
they haven't even learned how to process information as a middle schooler.
Right.
Like, they are still kids when they first enter,
I remember as a 6th grade teacher, like the first few months of school, like before Christmas break, for the 6th graders, like I'd be like passing your papers, put your name on your paper, pass it in. And they'd like raise their hand and be like, I put the date on it too. Should I rewrite it? I'm like, what? Why are you asking me this question? And then it was like Christmas happened, and then all of a sudden they were in middle school.
Well, no, I mean, I was even walking through church yesterday on the way to, where we attend big church. We dropped our girls off in the middle school environment. And you could tell who a 6th grader was.
Yeah.
Like 100%. Like, they were, like, the boys were 3 feet tall, and and they looked like deer in the headlights. What is happening? And they've been part of that middle school environment now for almost 6 weeks.
Right.
And it is still like, what is happening right now? And so I love that you say that about the bridge into it, because that really is what Caught in Between is all about, because they're falling through the cracks.
Right.
It's like the bridge has these massive gaps between the spaces on it. It's like a rope bridge, and they're just falling through the cracks. And what a preteen ministry does is it catches them in between, and it helps them navigate that bridge and helps bring them from one to the next. And that's not just in the fun stuff that they wish that they had in children's ministry, but it's also the way we process scriptural truth
So good.
from one phase to the next.
I love that concept of caught in between, because in high school ministry, we often talk about that scary statistic that 70% or 80% or 60%, whatever book you're reading at the moment, is the number of kids who leave the faith after they leave high school. And then we say, well, nobody noticed that they really left their faith in 10th grade.
Right.
Yeah.
But they were still showing up. And I think that's also true of 4th and 5th grade.
Absolutely.
We don't notice because they're physically still there.
Right.
But
Yeah.
we may have already lost them.
Yeah, I mean, if you catch kids in the transitions, think about how many kids should be graduating high school.
Right.
So instead
all
of
the kids that we've lost along the way, and we're just talking about from 9th grade to 12th grade, but we've probably lost a ton of them even before they get to that 9th grade, that high school environment.
Instead of comparing 12th grade to 11th grade, we should compare 12th grade to 4th grade.
Sure.
Yeah.
That's wild.
that is.
My mind is blown right now. This is good stuff. I'm going to check out for the rest of this podcast.
I process all of this.
I think one of the places we lose students most is in the questions, like
Yeah.
what you're saying, which reminded me of something that I read in the book that I loved. I wanted to share it with you guys. Dan says, the point is, don't let kids wait until adulthood to wrestle with tough questions. Preteens need a place where they can think critically about concepts that adults now take for granted. And in all honesty, giving preteens room to question can be exhausting because you've already processed those questions for yourself. You might have an answer that you feel good about. You might feel perfectly okay not having an answer, but just remember this. This isn't about your answer. This is about their process. So good.
It's really
So
good.
good.
It's really
Which
good.
really is about, I think, student ministry in general.
Yeah.
Agreed.
You know, because if you are an adult leader, you have wrestled through a
Yeah.
lot. And you take for granted that they are at the beginning of their journey. Or maybe not the beginning, but they're not at the part of the journey that you're at. Your job is a guide. You know, it's that I'm just a few steps ahead of you. And we're just going to walk through these together. And I love, it's absolutely processed.
I think that's why around here, a lot of us, and we all work for an organization that makes curriculum, so we're all a little biased toward using curriculum.
Sure.
But one of the reasons we're biased is that if I don't, I will teach what I'm learning now
Right.
at my age now.
Right.
Or if I'm in
Yes.
seminary, I'm teaching what I'm learning in my seminary classes to a group of 14-year-olds or a group of 12-year-olds.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's really more about where they are than where I am.
Yeah. Or should be. About
Or should be.
them. Yeah. That's great. So I think we can all agree that everything you're saying, Dan, we are like 100% on board with. Love it. But I think the
Good, thank
biggest
you.
question is, what does this look like played
Yeah.
out practically in a church
Yeah.
environment, especially if there's just a children's pastor and one children's pastor and one student ministry pastor?
Absolutely.
What does this look like? What are the details, the kind of practical application of all of this?
That's a great question. Also, a big question,
Yeah.
you know, because a lot of it depends on the ministry, the church,
Right.
the dynamic, the volunteer structure, all of those things. The back half of the book is all about the implementation of the ideas.
Got it.
So that's sort of how I structured the book,
Yeah.
that the first half was like, who is this kid that we're talking about? And the back half is how can we help her?
Yeah.
You know, and how can we help him?
Yeah.
And what's the format and the strategy we can have behind that? So different models work in different environments. I've been able to visit lots of preteen environments in the last few months, which has been really cool. There are some where someone from student ministries and someone from children's ministry literally create the environment together.
Okay.
So they're sitting in a room
great.
and then they're getting volunteers to actually implement it, but
Okay.
they are figuring out, okay, well, what do we need to create and what are we going to do?
Right.
And how is it going to tie from this to that and that to this? And it does take both of them. It is a family, like you said, it's a family ministry
Yeah.
discussion.
Yeah.
But shout out to all those youth pastors and all those children's pastors
Who are getting
working
along.
together.
I know, right?
It's
That's a big
budget.
deal.
yeah, absolutely.
The answer
absolutely.
is preteen. How do you get them to get along? Preteen.
Preteen.
Yes, that's right. There you go.
Yeah, but you have to do the same thing. I mean, you probably have those same discussions for those churches with a middle school
Right.
pastor and a high school pastor. On some level, you do have to work together because you have to figure out what's the bridge,
Right.
What's the handoff, what's the pickup,
Yeah.
you know, all of those things. It's the relay race.
Yeah.
I would say the first thing a church needs to try to figure out is how to create a unique environment for their preteens as soon as possible.
Yeah.
Because by the time you get to the second half of fourth grade, beginning of fifth grade, you really are starting to check out of that environment. If you've been there since kindergarten, you've been a part of this environment for almost 6 years.
Yeah.
You also, at this phase of your life, are starting to remember things you did 2 or 3 years
Right.
ago. And very often, children's ministries are on a 3-year
Right.
scope and cycle. Like
Yeah.
we're going to take you from K to second and then third to fifth, but we're going to cover the same things. And you're like, in their minds, because of the way they process time, they just did that.
Yeah.
Right.
And so they're like, I just did that. Why am I
Yeah.
doing it again? And so they are on some level checking out because it's our fault.
Right.
One of the things that you mentioned in the book that I thought was just really helpful was the difference in a preteen and a middle school environment, because I was asking that question like,
Yeah.
okay, that's
well,
great. but
and
what
that's
is
the thing, because a lot of people, they're just moving them up. So they're
Right.
saying, okay, skip this, give them a unique environment, but it's not a unique environment. It's just your middle school environment.
Right.
So now you have 14-year-olds about to enter high school with 10-year-olds who hasn't turned 11 yet.
Yeah.
And that is a massive age span, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to say it's a similar tension we feel when people have a combined middle and high school ministry.
Yeah.
Is when they're there from 6th through 12th grade. By the time they're in 10th,
11 and
12th,
18.
they're like, we've been doing this forever. So it's like,
Right.
it just looks a little bit different in the age group. But absolutely that.
Yeah, because I feel the topics that a 5th grader and a 3rd grader, some of them should be the same, but it needs to be done at a different level with that 5th grader than it was done at the 3rd grader. And similarly, the 5th grader also, like we've said, needs some of what the 8th grader is hearing, but they also need to hear it at their level.
Yep.
Right. So tell me, we talked a little bit about 252 is the children's curriculum that we do here at Orange, and you're part of the preteen curriculum.
Yeah.
So tell me, how does that look different? How do the two curriculums look different? How do they look the same? So how does this
That's
differentiate?
great. So similar to XB3 middle and high school, we have a shared scope and cycle. Ours is though 100% the same. So
Okay.
there's no variation, in that you guys have. But the approach is from a place of tension,
Okay.
which we worked really hard with the XB3 middle school team to learn how do we introduce tension into an environment, especially our large group environment, which is really more of a communicator than a storyteller. But instead of a bottom line, we have a key question.
Okay.
And I talk about the difference in the book between tying bows and landing planes.
Okay.
In the way that we communicate to kids. And when we communicate to kids, we love to create a little present and we tie a bow on it. So when they are finished with large group, they know exactly what they need to know, and here it is. And then when they get to small group, they open up the package and they look at it again, but then they bring it back together and they tie the bow. For a preteen environment, I love the analogy of landing a plane. When a plane lands at the airport, you are not at your final destination yet. You want them to continue thinking past the large group environment into the small group environment, which is why we land with a question. Because the question is cueing the brain. You still need to start thinking, you still need to be thinking about this.
Right.
We're not done with the discussion yet.
Yeah.
We're not going to give them all the answers in that large group environment. We are going to set them up to explore the topic on their own.
Right. Okay.
In the context of that small group.
Yeah. That's great. I love that, because I feel like that feels possible to talk about a certain topic in children's ministry, in the younger children's ministry, and then just tweak it just enough to make it work.
Yeah, because the applications are going to be different.
Right.
They're going to be more, even the way we do our videos, like if you use our video for the communicator part, it is like you're watching a YouTube video, like you're watching Rhett and Link. It's a little random, it's zany, but it's speaking their language.
Yeah.
Hey, those videos that you guys have been producing for preteens is maybe one of my favorite parts of this whole thing. And I'm going to pretend like I just watched them for research and not because I think they're hilarious.
Nice.
But you can actually watch those for free online, right? Is that true?
Yes. If you go to studio252.tv, all of our 252 curriculum videos are posted on there. But yeah, if you look for the So-and-So show, that is our preteen exclusive.
The So-and-So show.
Yeah, the So-and-So
so
show. It's a mouthful. Yeah.
So I think most of our listeners, or all of the listeners, would agree with what you're saying, but chances are we're dealing with a lot of churches that don't necessarily have the volunteer capacity to make this happen or the space in their building to make this happen. Budget, whatever. So what?
There's lots of things.
A lot of different variables there. So what would you say to them? What should they do to help make this possible, a reality for them?
Yeah, well, I would say, just because you may not be able to create a unique environment every Sunday for them, you can create unique experiences throughout the year.
That's great.
You really want your preteens to be anticipating something. I mean, really throughout entire family ministries.
Yeah.
To keep them wanting more.
Right.
That you're
What's
not
next?
giving everything away, let's say you do have a preteen environment. I'm not going to give that preteen environment everything my high school environment has.
Right.
Like
That's a
I
great
am
point.
going to tailor it along the way, so there's always something that they're looking forward to.
Right.
So if you can't create that environment, I would say it's with your small group leaders. You know, what is the unique small group experience that you can give a 4th and 5th grader, even if they're in the same room with a kindergartner through a 3rd grader? What is different about those small group leaders if they're not consistent up until now is now when you really make them consistent small groups where they are same kids, same leader, and you start to really ramp up the relational aspects. It could be that they get a camp experience that the rest of children's ministry doesn't get. And so when they're in 3rd grade, they're like, oh, I can't wait to get to this,
Right.
to 4th and 5th grade, because I get to do this
Right.
camp thing, or I get to go do this service project thing,
Right.
or I get to come on stage and be part of the worship
Yeah.
team, or, you know, whatever that is, you elevate something, whether it's a leadership thing or an event thing, that can happen,
Yeah.
you know, regardless. But I've seen multi-site churches make preteen environments out of pipe and drape in a hallway.
That's awesome. Yeah.
So the space does not need to be an issue if you can figure out creative ways to create environments.
yeah. Dan, that's super helpful. It's no matter what your church size, budget size, whatever, it's possible to make this work. And I love that. Super tangible steps to take. Does anybody have any final thoughts? Anything they kind of want to wrap this up with?
I would just say, from talking to middle school pastors, they often wonder, this is a kid thing. Like, do I really need to pay attention to this? I would say yes. And this is why. You want positive momentum going into middle school.
Right.
Amen.
As the middle school pastor, you don't want to feel like you are trying to rope all of these kids back. I mean, we have statistics. We have talked to the churches who are re-enrolling kids into 6th grade. Like, they have literally dropped off the attendance roster.
Right.
What if, just think about it, what if you worked with kids ministry and you built momentum so the kids never checked out?
Yeah.
In fact, they brought friends because they loved it so
Right.
much, and you had to add kids because you were literally adding kids, not because they were coming back. You know?
So
Gosh,
good.
That is so inspiring as the high school person sitting around the table, because I think it's so tempting to feel like, not my job.
Yeah.
But honestly, I mean, if we were able to harness the momentum that kids feel about coming to church in elementary school and keep it through middle school, how much easier would our jobs be in high school?
Yeah.
And I just feel, I don't know, I feel personally challenged in that instead of looking at the kids we graduate this year from senior year to 11th grade, maybe we need to start imagining what it would be like if the same number of kids we graduate from 5th grade to 6th grade are still with us senior year.
Yeah.
And I think preteen ministry is probably going to be the key to that.
Yeah.
I love it.
That's awesome. Well, Dan, this was super helpful and insightful, and thank you for joining us. And we definitely want to link to your book, so we'll have a link to that in our show notes. But where can people go right now? Where's the easiest place people could go to find your book?
Amazon. It's the
Amazon.com.
Prime that
easiest.
thing.
Absolutely.
Prime it.
Amazon,
Caught
yeah.
in Between is the name of the book, and it's a fantastic resource. I want to encourage everybody to check it out. So thanks for joining us for the Rethinking Youth Ministry podcast. And if you enjoyed today's episode, we'd love you to subscribe to the podcast through our podcast app and leave us a review. And if you want to learn more about the student curriculum and strategy we're all a part of at Orange, then visit the show notes for this episode at rethinkingym.org. Until next time, thank you for listening.